GCSE Drama, Component 1, Devising. Changes to the requirements for 2021 and top tips for devising at a distance. Statement from the Principal Moderator. This support session was recorded on the 15th of September 2020. As it currently stands, we now have confirmation from the DFE and Ofqual in regards to the changes that will be made to the requirements of the qualification. The information that I will give you today will focus on the requirements for Component 1 devising. Further information will be provided regarding the requirements for Component 2 and Component 3. We are still waiting for further guidance with regards to when the examinations will take place in 2021, and as soon as we have any further news, this will be shared with you immediately. With this in mind, the information I'm going to give you today is based on the amended requirements for the assessment of Component 1. We now have a new tab on the GCSE Drama webpage where all the updated information and guidance on the 2021 series can be found. As Principal Moderator and a GCSE Drama teacher myself, I understand the challenges faced by all teachers at this difficult time, and in particular the unique challenges posed for drama teachers and students. The purpose of this session is not to offer training, but to offer clarification with regards to the agreed amendments to the delivery and assessment of Component 1, and to share ideas that we as drama teachers may use to approach the new challenges of devising performance work and performing for a live audience, all whilst maintaining the social distancing and hygiene guidance and rules as set out by the government, the DFE, and your individual school leaders. So the aims and objectives. We will recap on the demands of Component 1 and any changes to the delivery, assessment and requirements for 2021. We will consider practical ways of devising and delivering GCSE Component 1 in light of social distancing requirements, the changes to the demands of Component 1 and the approaches to design roles. We will address common issues and answer any frequently asked questions. We will also offer further support. The specification, overview and changes to the requirements. Component 1 Overview. This is a coursework component worth 40% of the qualification, 60 marks in total. A01, A02 and A04 are assessed. This is internally assessed and externally moderated. A01 looks at the creation and development of ideas to communicate meaning for theatrical performance. A02 is the application of theatrical skills to realise artistic intentions in live performance. And A04 is the analysis and evaluation of the student's own work. This is unchanged. There are two parts to the assessment that are also unchanged. The first part is a portfolio which can be written or recorded. A01 and A04 are assessed in the portfolio with a total of 45 marks. 30 marks are assigned to the assessment of A01 and 15 marks to the assessment of A04. There is then the devised performance or design realisation. This is the assessment of A02. 15 marks are assigned to the assessment of the final performance or design realisation. Timings for A02 and group sizes. We will allow performance or design to be completed through a monologue, duologue, or a group performance with new regulatory minimum times. We will retain our current maximum timings, and therefore the timings for the 2021 assessment will be as follows. For a monologue, the minimum timing is 1.5 minutes and the maximum 3 minutes. For a duologue, the minimum timing is 2 minutes and the maximum 5 minutes. For a group of 3 to 4 performance students, the minimum timing is 2 minutes with the maximum timing of 15 minutes, and a group of 5 to 6 performance students, the minimum timing is also 2 minutes, but the maximum timing is 25 minutes. There is no longer a requirement to award 0 marks for performances under the regulatory minimum time requirement. This information has been amended in the specification available online and should be supportive of students during this challenging time. There will still be a cap at level 2 for any students that do not meet the regulatory minimum requirement. Students can work to the minimum timings rather than the maximum timings if this is supportive. In addition, one design student from each of the 4 disciplines may be assigned to a group. This does not change the timings. Design students in AO2. The design requirement for Component 1 will be suspended, and instead the designers will work according to the Component 2 design requirements. These can be found on page 36 to 37 of our specification. The reason for this change is that the additional documentation and the requirements for Component 2 allow for the work with monologues and duologues. We consider this to be the most straightforward change for centres to manage, rather than adjusting the Component 1 requirements, which are on page 15 of our specification. Alternative evidence for realisation of design work. For Component 1, if a designer is not able to realise their design in a final performance, for example, if there is a localised or national lockdown, or they cannot access the necessary equipment they need to realise their design, then we will use the evidence from the design requirements in the specification. That includes the additional documentation. For 2021, the additional documentation and requirements will be the Component 2 requirements as laid out on pages 36 to 37 of the specification, as these are applicable for the creation of monologues and duologues, as well as group performances. If a design student is not able to realise their design in performance, we will accept any rehearsal recordings or any other evidence that the student feels can help to determine how their design would have worked in performance. We expect to see some form of realisation of the design. This may be in the form of a recorded or written presentation explaining the intended design and what has been realised. This could include visual evidence such as photographs or visual recordings. Teachers must then use their professional judgment, looking at the design requirements for AO2 and the evidence provided to give the design student a fair mark. Here are some examples of the evidence we would expect to see. So for a costume designer, which may include makeup, hair and mask if applicable, we would expect to see the design realised. If not during the live performance, the costume and possibly makeup, hair and mask could be displayed on another person and evidenced through photographs or visual recordings. For a lighting designer, we would expect to see either the lighting implemented during the performance or a visual recording of the cue-to-cue lighting states, so that would not require the actors to be in the space. For a set designer, we would expect the set is built within the centre and evidence of the staging sent to the moderator. This could be photographic or visual recording. If this is not during the live performance, we would expect to see an indication of the performance entrances and exits, as well as the intended positions of the performers' props during the performance. This could be displayed using a model box or a floor plan. For a sound designer, we would expect to hear the sound implemented during the performance or a cue-to-cue operation. Students may submit a soundscape or a recording of the sound effects. Device performances and an audience. For component 1, the requirement to perform in front of a live audience has been amended to allow for both live and virtual audiences. This means that students can perform live or virtually in front of a small audience to include their teacher or just their teacher. The teacher must be present to authenticate the work of the students. There is the requirement to record performances. There is, however, no requirement for the final performances to be completed and performed with full design if performance students are not working with a designer. So, how can social distancing support the production of the portfolio evidence? Students are required to answer the 6 questions detailed below on this slide as part of their portfolio. These questions can be used as headings for each portfolio section or as prompts during a vocal or recorded portfolio. This is unchanged. However, Question 2 has been slightly amended to support candidates who work on monologues and/or duologues. So you can see in red, question 2 now reads as follows. What work did you and others do in order to explore the stimuli and start to create ideas for performance? All of the questions are unchanged. Production and structure of the portfolio. Students should be working on their portfolio evidence throughout the process. However, things may be slightly different in 2021. Questions 1 and 2 are the early stages of the devising process. So this is the initial responses to the stimuli and early exploration. This could focus on a group performance started before lockdown, even if the end performance is a monologue. Do not make students rewrite work already completed. Question 3 and 4 focuses on the refinements and the rehearsals, and therefore, because the focus is on refinements, they could look at changes that have had to be made due to COVID and health and safety. For example, they could focus on restructuring the work, perhaps changes to techniques to accommodate social distancing, or even a shift from a group performance to a monologue. Question 5 and 6 focus on the end product. Students must analyse and evaluate the impact of their final performance and their contributions to that performance. In 2021, this can now include not only the final performance itself, but the students' intentions for performance that may not have been realised due to COVID restrictions. The word counts and/or timings for the production of the portfolio evidence are unchanged. However, there are some things to consider that can make the portfolio evidence less time-consuming and supportive to your students. Students should be working on producing their portfolio throughout the entire devising process. Some of this could be completed as home learning to support the blended approach to education, so a flipped classroom approach. Students could record their responses to the portfolio questions at home, and the work could be presented on recordings if this is supportive in terms of working from home. So what I mean here is if they are doing a verbal portfolio, they could record that at home, because obviously they're on screen and you can see it's their own work. Students can work to the minimum word counts and timings rather than the maximum ones, and they will not be penalised for doing so. The following authentication changes have been made for 2021. Students must be supported either in class or remotely during the creation of the portfolio to allow teachers to authenticate each student's work. If any of this work is completed remotely, then the teacher must have supervised enough of this process in order to authenticate the work. Digital signatures are acceptable on the authentication sheet, and this is in Appendix 1 of the specification. Word counts and timings for the portfolio. Option 1 is a handwritten or typed evidence between 1,500 and 2,000 words. Option 2 is a recorded or verbal evidence between 8 to 10 minutes. And option 3 is a combination of the handwritten or typed evidence, which would be between 750 and 1,000 words, and recorded or verbal evidence between 4 and 5 minutes. Maximum word counts and time limits must be adhered to, as work beyond the maximum will not be moderated and should not be assessed in the centre. However, minimum word counts and timings will be acceptable and will not penalise the student's ability to access the higher levels of achievement. Questions 3 and 4 focus on refinements and rehearsals, as well as artistic decisions. Social distancing could form a large part of this section, or changes from a group performance to a monologue or duologue. Question 5 and 6 focus on the end product, the final design or performance. Students can evaluate and analyse how successful their performance was and celebrate the successes they have had in terms of thinking differently and creatively due to social distancing, and also the issues involved that may have meant they did not create a scene in the way that they had initially wanted to. We will allow students to discuss intended final outcomes in response to the questions that make up their portfolio, as well as actual final outcomes. If a student works as an individual on a monologue, then please ensure that when you assess the student's work for A01, that you do not assess the student for collaboration, as this is not relevant. You should still assess the student for their engagement with the process of rehearsal and refinement. This is bullet point 3 on the assessment criteria for A01. You can see that there highlighted in blue. Pending any confirmation of the exam window being moved to a later start for 2021, the 15th of May is the submission date for component 1. However, if the exam timetable is amended, then it may be possible to review the submission deadline. Theatrical devices and techniques for devising at a distance and teaching techniques to socially distance. If you saw my previous presentation, you will have seen this slide already. This is from Open Drama UK with some top tips on how you can socially distance and work in a studio space. So it was things like having your seating plan or group plan where groups work in the same space each session, not sharing resources such as theatrical masks, puppets and props, keeping doors and windows open so the room is ventilated, allowing students to enter one at a time. You could consider keeping a contact register for your own records. Technical equipment should be operated by the teacher where possible. If it is by the student for exam work, then antibacterial wipes and fluids should be used to clean all equipment, and obviously regular hand washing. Mobile phones could be used for playing music and research, but you would need to consider your school policy. And keep costumes simple. Can students supply their own, take them home and wash them after each session? And finally, clean down chairs, blocks and wipe surfaces after each session. So techniques for devising at a distance. Consideration can be given to the structure and style of the performance. So the work may be episodic, theme or topic based rather than more narrative and realistic. Themes, topics and stimuli that lend themselves to distant or separate characters and more distant proxemics may be helpful. For example, the theme of isolation, bullying, prejudice, etc. Site-specific theatre using an outside space if possible. Peter Brook's empty space that will not fill in the space with set and props, keeping that space empty and minimal. And use of media, projections, audio and video work to support live performance. Techniques that allow students to stand in their own space, socially distanced, and talk directly to the audience to develop character, relationships, or to move the narrative forward may be helpful. So monologues could be threaded into the devised work, or even a sequence of monologues to create a group performance. So for example, a group of 3 to 4 with one monologue each, all lasting just over 1 minute, would create 3 to 4 minutes of drama, allowing them to exceed the new regulatory minimum time for 2021 of 2 minutes. Thought tracking, direct address and asides, narration, news reports and verbatim speech from research, and a didactic approach may all be helpful. Techniques that focus on interesting ways to use dialogue and speech to create character and relationships. So there could be lots of choral or Greek chorus style works, so candidates can be separate. Repetition of dialogue and creation of echoes. Shared speech delivered from their own socially distanced space. Overlapping speech to develop relationships and characters. For example, friends who are having problems in their relationship both share their experiences. The actors overlap the last few words of one character's dialogue with the start of the other character's dialogue, and this continues throughout the direct address. Use of soundscapes, atmosphere created through vocal sounds, use of song or lines of poetry to support the intention for the audience, voiceovers, recorded sound to support the live vocal work in performance. Techniques that focus on interesting ways to use space and movement. So split stage for different locations, time zones, states of mind, etc. Greek chorus movement techniques such as canon, unison, or repetition of movements and gestures delivered from their own space on the stage. Choreographed movement or sequences that are symbolic and demonstrate the characters or their relationships from a distance. Use of levels and inventive use of space and proxemics. Techniques such as chairs duets, but 2 meters apart. Movement motif work, either solo or distanced. The use of mirroring for symbolic or realistic movements and gestures. The use of mime sequences, and this is an opportunity to use no properties. Use of theatrical masks, but only if the masks are bought for the individual, not shared, and cleaned thoroughly. Frequently asked questions due to COVID-19 and social distancing. In this section, I've picked up on some of the main frequently asked questions. However, we are publishing a document that has more frequently asked questions in there for you to have a look at, and that will be, if you refer back to my first slide, in the new area to support you during these challenging times. What happens if the students were halfway through their devising? Are they expected to start again? Absolutely not. If the students are in the same bubble, or you are able to teach them in their original devised groups, then they should continue with the work they have started. Consideration to style, techniques and structure may be amended to accommodate social distancing if this is a requirement of your school setting, because all schools are approaching this in slightly different ways. However, this can be an exciting opportunity to further develop students' work in new and interesting ways. The adaptation of their work in light of social distancing will also be supportive to students in meeting the demands of questions 3 and 4 when writing or preparing their portfolio. And I've placed questions 3 and 4 there just to remind you. My students have already completed their devised work. Do they need to redo it in September using the new guidelines? If your students have already completed their practical work for component 1 and the recording was made of the final examined performance, they should be able to continue their portfolio and submit the work as normal. If the practical work was completed but the recording was not made, the work could be revisited and suitable adjustments made to adhere to social distancing requirements. There is an opportunity here that if students have done most of their group work and they have written about it, they could perform small sections of that to record as evidence of their AO2 skills or monologues based on their group performance. This may be helpful to centres who are not allowed to have their whole group working together practically at the current time. Remember, there are 8 months to go until the work is due to be submitted, and whilst I appreciate there's component 2 and 3 to address, there is sufficient time to edit and refine the final performance or design realization. So not start again, just to make some small refinements. How do we approach devising with social distancing in place? So everything that I've covered so far in the presentation, but just to remind you that monologues and duologues can now be created instead of group performances. You may consider working in smaller groups. Groups can work to those minimum timings rather than the maximum. And the portfolio evidence can be completed remotely as long as the teacher assessor can sign the authentication statement, so they have seen and supervised enough of that process. How does social distancing work for students who are design candidates? So sound and lighting designers, there should be no problem socially distancing. Some students may find these design routes supportive. Just ensure all equipment touched is appropriately cleaned with antibacterial wipes or fluids. Remember, there is no requirement for these designers to operate their sound or lighting design as long as they supervise the operation of their design. Set designers, consideration would need to be given as to how props are used, if at all. Props should not be shared, they should be stored separately or by the performer and cleaned thoroughly after and before use. Set design that includes painted flats, backdrops and projections may be supportive at this time. Costume designers. The performer's family members should take the measurements on behalf of the designer to ensure social distancing, unless your school allows contact within your individual bubbles. Costumes should be washed in school where possible after designed and then taken home and kept safe by the performer. The performer should wash their costume after each use at home. Theatrical masks must not be shared. Again, these should be kept by the performer and cleaned thoroughly. Any makeup or hair designs as part of the costume design should be designed by the design candidate, but applied by the performer themselves, following the design carefully. Just a reminder then that for component 1 now, we have suspended the additional documentation and requirements for component 1. However, the component 2 requirements, as laid out on page 36 and 37 of the specification, are the ones that you should now use with your students. This is because it refers to monologues and duologues and is more supportive of the students. What if our designers cannot have their design realised in the performance for component 1 or 2 due to the restrictions in our centre? If a designer is unable to have their designs realised in the performance, they can provide additional evidence as outlined earlier in this presentation. We do understand that there may be some instances when the realisation of the design may not be possible. In these instances, we are asking that the assessment for AO2 is done on the design requirements, and we will also accept any rehearsal recordings or any other evidence that the student feels can help to determine how their design would have worked in performance. For 2021, the component 1 requirements, as stated previously, are now on page 36 to 37, as they allow for the monologue and duologue option. Can my students perform without an audience? Yes, your audience can simply be the teacher recording the work. You could have another group as the audience, or a small group of students or staff within the year 11 bubble. It is what works in your space and is agreed as the safest approach by your school for all involved. Do we still need to record the device performance for the moderator as evidence? Yes, the moderation process will happen as usual. Therefore, you must record all of the performances as evidence and store these safely in the centre. A copy will be sent to your moderator as evidence of the student's AO2 mark. If you are using site-specific locations for performances or performing outside, please try to ensure the recording is high quality. Do your best. If it is difficult to film in your studio space, ensuring all students are on camera at all times whilst socially distanced, then please pan and zoom accordingly. Do your best to keep the students on camera where possible. Remember that all student identifications must also be recorded at the beginning of their performance, and this must be conducted to maintain social distance. If it is easier to record these separately with individual students, then please do so, but label the identifications carefully for moderation purposes. What adjustments have been made due to the fact that students have missed over a full term of practical work already? So in summary, the adjustments agreed for component 1 are as follows. Students can now complete a monologue or duologue rather than working in a group. They do not have to start again. They can amend a group piece that they did start work on before lockdown, or they could complete monologues and duologues that are a development from their group piece. This means that if they have already written sections of their portfolio, they do not need to revisit and rewrite them. If a student works as an individual on a monologue, then please ensure that when you assess the student's work for AO1, you do not assess the student for collaboration, as this is not relevant. You should still assess the student for their engagement with the process of rehearsal and refinement. Obviously, you can assess a student for collaboration if they started in a group and their monologue has developed from that group piece. The minimum regulatory timings have now been lowered to ensure work can be produced and recorded more quickly to support students with the time that they have lost. If students have previously worked on group pieces, they can create a monologue or duologue from their original piece and include ideas and work from both the original group performance and the amendments for their monologue or duologue in their portfolio entry. Students can work to the minimum timings for their performance and the minimum word counts and/or timings for their portfolio. Designers must use the criteria for component 2 when producing their additional documentation. This is on page 36 to 37 of the specification and refers to monologues and duologues. Designers can send alternative evidence if there are issues in realising the designs in performance due to local lockdowns, etc. Further support and questions. If you have any further questions or you need further support, you can contact your subject advisor, which is Paul Webster. His email address is on this slide. He does also post more informally on Twitter and Facebook. Paul also has a subject page that can be found on the links here, and you can sign up for his updates, which he will email to your school address. You can ask the experts if you have questions that are particularly focused on you and your candidates and your situation, and there is the link there also. Final thoughts. These are challenging times for us all. Therefore, if you are not sure about anything, then please ask the experts. There are no silly questions. We are all here as a drama community to share ideas and to support each other. Keep things simple for you and your students. If completing work from before lockdown is the easiest way forward, then do it. If creating monologues will save time, then do it. Work to the minimum timings and word counts if this is supportive of your students. There is no expectation to work to the maximum. Happy devising, and please stay safe.